All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? And if more folks jump in, then they can jump in a few minutes later. That's not a problem. Good afternoon. My name is Keith Peeler. I am the Director of Alumni Relations at Husson. I'm going into, I'm in about year 3 at my time at Husson, and part of my role, large part of my role is putting on online events for our alumni, whether it's in person or online. And this is continuing our series of online events this year. So thank you to our panelists for joining us and our guests for joining us today. Letting you know that we are going to record this because we post them up on our alumni YouTube page afterwards for those who aren't able to make the call. And today's agenda really is kind of going through the careers for our panelists and learning more about some memorable cases, ways to get into law enforcement, and technology used in law enforcement. And this agenda was based on feedback from those who have registered. And certainly if there are questions from the audience as we go, feel free to shout them out or put them in the chat, or we can revisit that at the end as well. So why don't we kind of go around the room here and do some introductions. We'll start with you, Jay. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your career path, how you got into law enforcement, you know, that kind of thing, and where it got you to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I'm currently a detective assigned to the Unsolved Homicide Unit in the State Police. I started my college career at University of Maine at Fort Kent, transferred to University of Southern Maine, received an associate's at Fort Kent and a bachelor's in criminology at USM. Continued my education at Husson, so I graduated last spring with a master's in criminal justice administration. But my law enforcement career path kind of started through my family. I have several family members that were game wardens, a couple that were troopers, and I decided to go the state police route when I took some classes at UMFK, and it was a lieutenant with the Criminal Investigations Division who was teaching the course. So I really got interested in investigations, specifically homicides, and that's basically where it got me today. That's my main interest is homicide investigation, and especially now cold case ones. So
Excellent. Thank you, Jay. And Chris Coleman, let's go to you next.
Oh, great. Good afternoon, everybody. My interest in the state police started in the 8th grade, actually. They was asked our class to put down what we wanted to be when we grew up, and I put down a Maine State trooper. My dad was a trooper, and I think that had something to do with it. But I graduated Bucksport High School, and I went to University of Southern Maine, and I got a degree in the criminology with the intention of going to the state police when I had a chance. I accepted an offer in the state police my senior year of college, and I joined the 42nd Maine State Police Training Troop along with another panelist here, Christopher Grotton. I was the second youngest in the class. I was just 22 years old at the time, and Christopher Grotton was the youngest in the class. He was 21. So upon graduation, I was assigned to Troop J, which is Hancock County. And I spent 6.5 years as a trooper. About 5 years in, I became a member of the State Police Tactical Team. And about 6.5 years in, I became a detective with the State Police. About 8 years in, I was a sergeant, and I worked in the Skowhegan area. And then I became a sergeant in charge of a section of detectives in Bangor. I did some work at the training academy, was promoted to the rank of lieutenant, and I ran a field troop for 5 years. And then I transferred back into the major crimes unit. I ran that for 3.5 years in the northern part of Maine. And somewhere along the line, I became the TAC team commander, and I served in that role for about 3 years. And I retired from the state police in 2014, and I became the chief of Ellsworth PD for about 1.5 years before I walked away from the job altogether. So after that, I worked at Maine Maritime Academy for a while, and then I was hired as the deputy assistant security director at Husson, and I did Title IX investigations for a couple of years, and then I got my master's degree, and I started teaching about 3 years ago.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And Chris Grotton, how about you?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I appreciate being included in this panel. My interest in law enforcement, I think probably was formed through middle school, high school, and as I was I grew up in Southern Maine. I attended the University of Maine in Orono. I was going to school for business because I had no idea what I wanted to do. So that was the default, is you went to school for business management. I was working, I'd always been involved in public safety. I was an EMT when I was like 16 or 17 on our volunteer ambulance, which sort of brought me in contact with law enforcement, firefighters, that folks that were giving of themselves for their community. I did some part-time dispatching back in high school, so I'd been around public safety. I was doing some part-time law enforcement work at a few different departments through college. That brought me in contact with the state police, and folks up in this greater Bangor area that I encountered were very impressive. And as I had a chance to start to ride with some troopers and saw the variety and the severity of the calls and the incidents that they became involved with, I was fascinated with that. As a deputy during the summertime in Cumberland County, I worked some of like the Harpswell contracts and things like that. And when I noticed that when the state police showed up, they brought with them a level of professionalism and capability that was intriguing to me as a young deputy. So I applied for the state police, and in the middle of my senior year of business management college, I was accepted, and which is where I met Chris Coleman in December of 1989. I absolutely loved it. I loved the training environment. I was 21 years old. I grew up an awful lot real quick, but I really enjoyed it, and graduated in the spring of 1990. I was assigned as a rural patrol trooper in this greater Bangor area. A couple of years in, I had a chance to start doing some training and working with new troopers. I really found a love for teaching and training. I had a chance to I was a canine handler for about 7 years, working patrol and drug dog. I was a crash reconstructionist. Did some instruction here and there. Became a supervisor. I was a patrol sergeant here in Troop E for about 4 years. So now I'm 12 years into my career. I had a chance to go to the academy and was asked to lead the training staff for the 1st and 2nd BLEPs, the very beginning of Maine's combined law enforcement basic training academies, which was will always be a career highlight. Very challenging, but very enjoyable. Made lifelong friendships and learned an awful lot about that unique environment. Then I applied and was promoted to the rank of lieutenant, and I took over our traffic safety unit, which at the time included commercial vehicle enforcement, all of the crash response pieces, some business processes, the state's inspection program. That was the beginning of my experience and exposure to the Maine legislature and policy level work. Very interesting. It gave me chances to travel the country, to work on a lot of policy initiatives that I never thought years before I would ever be involved with. I had a chance to do some innovative things, bringing technology to Maine law enforcement. We first started putting cruisers and computers in cruisers. We moved online with crash records and all of those sorts of things. So it was a exposure to a whole new world for me. I was there for a number of years, and then I transferred to a different lieutenant's position. I had a chance to head up the state's Intelligence Fusion Center, which was had never really been developed. So I had a chance to help build that business plan, build a new facility, and change the way Maine deals with law enforcement intelligence, and our connections to the national and international sort of intelligence community. I also was responsible for our training, recruiting, and all of our specialty teams at the time. So that was some whole new worlds, very challenging. And then I became a member of the State Police Command Staff. There are 4 of us that run the State Police, and I had a chance to become a member of the Command Staff in 2011. I spent the last nine and a half years of my career in that role. Then I retired in September of 2020 to become the Associate Vice President of Safety and Security here at Husson. Had always had a love for Husson. Dean Hanson she's probably smiling right now, because I came back and actually met her, and she really is the reason that I probably finished college. Not only did I not want to disappoint my parents because they were thrilled when Chris left college to go join the state police in 1989, but it was something I always wanted to finish. And she kind of helped me work through that vision of finishing my college degree. And I was on a roll, so I continued and got my MBA here at Husson just a few years before I retired, but I got it done before I retired, and enjoying some new challenges here at Husson University.
That's terrific. Thank you, Chris. One of you told me a few weeks ago about starting your careers together in late 80s, early 90s, going separate ways for so many years, and all of a sudden you're back at Husson. I just think that's a terrific story to share. You know, you started and then you're kind of wrapping up part of your retirement years at Husson, which is terrific. What drew you to Husson specifically? Was there something that stood out to Husson for you to draw you back here?
A couple of things. Really, my college experience here, not only with Dean Hanson, I had actually taken a constitutional law class with Brian McMaster, who's on this call from the Attorney General's office. So I had an affinity for Husson. I had spent my entire career in this area, so I had there was a comfort level. The previous director, Ray Bissett, he and I worked together in the command staff. Again, another retiree from the state police. So I had seen his excitement and heard many positive things about Husson from Ray Bissett. The fact that Chris Coleman, a great friend, was here was sort of comforting as well. But I think in my experience, and I may be biased, I think Husson does the best job in terms of preparing future law enforcement officers and folks coming into the criminal justice field. I like their approach to high standards, high quality, in a sense of realism. So it was for all of those reasons that I was really excited when I found out that this opportunity might be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. What are some ways folks can get into the field of law enforcement, and has that trajectory changed over the past 20 to 30 years as you've been in your various roles, as far as folks of all ages wanting to get into the law enforcement field?
I think it certainly has changed. I think a lot of the folks who wanted to do this, and the other guys will have a perspective as well. But the folks that wanted to get in here to drive fast and do exciting things and all the adrenaline things, I think it's less about that now. It's more about serving and helping people. I think it's more about making a difference in our communities. And we've all had that chance to do this in different ways. I always, as a member of the command staff, I would always meet with our graduating brand new troopers. And I always told them that the best thing about being a state trooper and the best thing about being a public servant is that you will have that chance to make a meaningful difference in someone's life, if not daily, very frequently. And you may not realize it, and it may not be something dramatic. It may be a simple task, but you have that chance to be that knight in shining armor and be the good guy and keep someone safe or prevent something bad in many ways. And you may not always recognize that when it happens, but you get those opportunities. And the types of careers that are that meaningful are rare, but it's been very meaningful to me. I think I want to believe that the folks who are getting into this line of work see that value and are drawn to that sort of a role. So I'm sure the other fellows have different things that they've seen as well.
You guys want to add anything to that?
I can yield to my former lieutenant.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind of you. First, I want to address Husson. When I was serving as a chief at Ellsworth, I had an opportunity to hire several officers, and Husson has a history of a very incredible program. And by that, I mean that when students graduate to Husson, they're employable. Not so much because of, not only because of what they know, but also because of the values that Husson teaches. And it kind of leads into this next point is, what do you need to be a police officer? You need excellent character. And as Major Grotton said, you need a desire to serve the public. through the legal studies program at Husson, those are the things that kind of serve as the cornerstones of our program. We constantly address the fact that these are public service jobs. You're not there to make money. You're not there to exercise power. Those things come with the position, but you're really there to serve the public. And Husson has a track record of producing officers that are extremely successful in the field, both at the state, county, local, and federal level. So that reputation it started with Dean Hanson when she started the program, I don't know, 12 or 13 years ago, however long it was. But I do think the standards are changing in the sense of academics. If you look at a lot of the job postings from local PDs, they want at least an associate's degree. And a lot of times they give a value to a bachelor's degree. And if it's a leadership position like a sergeant, lieutenant, or deputy chief, then their master's degrees are preferred. So that aspect is changing. When Chris Grotton and I were hired, and it's still the truth now with the state police, you don't need a college degree to become a trooper. It certainly helps. And it's moving in the direction where at some point, I believe it's going to be required, but right now it isn't, because they're looking at the character, the work ethic, the truthfulness, the motivation for the person to apply. Those types of things are as equally important as an academic education. Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, to go back as far as what drew me to Husson, I'm only here in an adjunct capacity, but I took classes from Dean Hanson as well as Professor Michaud, and I think both of them kind of drew me to Husson with the quality of instruction I received. So I know what the students at Husson are getting. So for me to have a chance to kind of give back and use what I've experienced in the field to hopefully help the students there understand what life might be after college and in a police career. Police careers are there to grab, especially right now. I know with my particular department, there's going to be a lot of retirements, and those positions are there to have. And as long as they are prepared through either Husson or other means, then those jobs are there for the taking. As far as what might lead somebody to law enforcement, I think when we've studied why troopers became troopers or decided to join the state police, a lot of it has to do with personal contact. I had relatives in the state police. Others may not have, but sometimes they have met the trooper. It could have been a very simple interaction, but if they saw the professionalism of the trooper, how they handle themselves, it kind of draws them to that type of career. You kind of see through the media what everybody thinks it's like, but if you know somebody that's in the field and they can kind of paint the picture of reality, then that might draw them to the position as well. We all, I'm sure everybody on this panel have somebody that drew them to their current career. And I think if you talk to every trooper, they have met somebody within the state police somewhere along their life to influence their decision. And that definitely happened to me.
Gotcha, that makes sense. As far as folks retiring, you mentioned, so the previous company I worked with, we talked with a lot of students about getting into the building trades and things like that. And the response we were getting from a lot of the industries where we're going to have this huge wave of retirees because not enough folks are getting into the business to pick up our jobs. And like you said, the jobs are there for the taking, but not enough students are jumping in line. Is something similar happening in the Maine State Police, or is folks are retiring and folks are just coming right up the line as they always have been?
Well, they're always trying to fill the positions that we have, the vacancies that we have. Major Grotton mentioned the BLETB, which is the basic law enforcement training, which is how we structure our academy now. It's a combined academy with sheriff's departments, municipal, and state police. Before, what we all experienced when we went through the academy was a strictly state police academy. So with that, you had larger classes, and with larger classes come potentially more retirements at once. So for example, I had 37 recruits that turned into troopers in my academy, and now we're graduating at a smaller rate, so maybe 10 to 15 troopers at a time. So the retirements, once we reach those classes with the BLEPI, those retirements are probably going to be more constant. But as we see it now, like my academy class, we're eligible for retirement in December of this year. You could have potentially about 30 people retiring at once if everybody chooses to go.
Could I address the retirement issue?
Yeah, no, absolutely, please.
There may be people that listen to this video that don't understand that the Maine State Police and most agencies in the state offer a 25 years of service and generally a no age retirement, which means you do your 25 years, then you have the option of retiring at about half your pension, half your pay for the rest of your life. Now, 25 years doesn't sound like a long time, and most people would think, geez, that doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like they've earned that retirement. But let me tell you, every day that you're a trooper or an officer wearing a badge and a gun, you're earning your money. And 25 years is enough time to experience most of what the job offers you. And then if you're young like me, I retired at 47 years old to start a second career. Most people either do that or they stay on until their normal retirement age of 65 or whatever that happens to be based on when they came on. But 25 years in the law enforcement role is almost an eternity. So it is different than a lot of other careers. And Major Grotton can correct me if I'm wrong, but that used to be the national average of those that came 25 years in retirement as a law enforcement officer. They retired and they got between 5 and 8 years of pension before they died. So it sounds like 25 years isn't a long time, but it really is in that line of work because of all the other things that go with it.
He's exactly right. The thing about these careers, as exciting and rewarding as it is, it takes a toll. And depending on your role in the agency, quite often as a supervisor, manager, a leader in the agency, you're taking on some of that burden from everyone else below you and around you. And we can all point to critical incidents or times when you're faced with just absolutely the worst of mankind, and you're dealing with incidents that are extremely difficult and long lasting. We've all had those experiences, but it's a very rewarding career. But by the time you hit that 25-year mark, although you may not realize this early in your career, but 25 years, it's a lot. It's certainly, in 25 years as a police officer, you're seeing a lot more than most folks would ever see in 5 lifetimes in terms of not just the worst of mankind, but also the best. But it's an awful lot.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That's got to take a toll in so many different ways. Absolutely. Let's jump on to the next question here, looking at memorable cases. And Chris Grotton, why don't we start with you? Was there a memorable case or incident or something that really, out of your top 10, is there something that kind of jumps out at you that you'd like to share with the audience, and what that case was about and why it was memorable for you?
So for me, it's not as much about one case. And I say that only because we've all had the experience of dealing with the criminal cases. These folks have got a lot more experience than I did in terms of homicides and some of those big cases that folks might remember. But for me, the thing that was probably the most memorable when I look back at my career, and may have taken a while for me to understand this, is what's been the most meaningful are the times that I got a chance to either innovate or bring about some sort of change or transformation, not just for the state police, but for law enforcement. And the 3 things real quick 3 examples I would offer. I didn't feel that we did a great job as a profession in managing incidents. And I looked at how other folks dealt with that, and I thought, our incidents are getting bigger all the time. They're more complex. There's more liability. There are more folks involved, and we do not do a great job of managing it. We made it work. We got through it, but there's got to be a better way. And I couldn't find one. So in 2007, I proposed to create I couldn't find a model to go by, but I said, why don't we call it an incident management assistance team, and let us create a model where we use the incident command system, bring that to support a chief or sheriff or department at a big event. And it took a while. It was there was a lot of cultural change. Was not immediately welcomed with open arms, especially by some folks in the state police that thought that I don't need any help managing anything. But over a few years, it took root, and we now have a formal specialty. And as I've seen that become very effective in cases like Norwich Walk, where Corporal Cole was murdered, and some other big incidents that we've all seen over the years, Ayla Reynolds and others, where when we look at these 68-day manhunts in Parkman, where that team, and not because of anything I did, I just came up with the idea and got it started, but folks have come behind me and brought with it technology and brought this entire response package to a major scene, so we can stand up any chief, any sheriff, any police officer, regardless of their experience in the past, and make that successful when it really counts. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the changes I think that's brought to all of us. I'm proud of the basic law enforcement training program. Not my idea, but I was fortunate enough to get to go in and help run the staff. And when I arrived, there were no processes, there were no systems. No one knew how we were going to do anything, from academics to physical fitness to anything. And it was fun to be part of that group that sort of came together, made that work, and the odds were against us. A lot of folks did not want it to succeed for various political reasons, inside and outside the state police. And it was fun to watch that. And now when I go to an academy graduation and I see folks wearing all different color uniforms, all working as one team, it has brought us together as a profession, because the folks that I was training 20 something years ago that I saw come through are now chiefs and sheriffs and lieutenants, and it's made a big difference in that relationship. So those are probably the two things that, when I look back, I'm the most proud of being just a small role in helping move those things forward, and so hopefully making changes that stand the test of time.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Chris Coleman, how about you?
Well, when you posted that question to us earlier the week, I started thinking about memorable cases, and I'm pretty old. I'm 53, so I've had a lot of cases. I think Jay, during my retirement celebration, he told me I've been involved in 125 homicide investigations. And some of those are memorable. Ayla Reynolds certainly is one of them. Jimmy Hicks, I think the state of Maine's first serial killer identified. It was an interesting story. It's kind of gruesome, but I was a young sergeant, and we had made an agreement with Jimmy Hicks. I don't know if Jay, if you were on then or not, but
That was right before
Jimmy Hicks was arrested in Texas for trying to murder his neighbor. And we knew that he had killed 3 ladies up here in Maine, and we had never found their bodies. So once he got arrested in Texas, he wanted to spend the remaining part of his life in a Maine jail and not a Texas prison. And we made an agreement with him to bring him back to Maine if he provided us the location of all the victims. And he did. I remember driving or flying back with him. We went down to Texas to pick him up. And he was explaining to us on the plane how he had dismembered his victims. But at the time, he was eating a chicken salad sandwich on the plane. And I just kept thinking, this is a surreal experience. I'm talking to this man who has absolutely no emotion about what he's talking about. He's complaining about the mayonnaise in his sandwich. But sure enough, we landed, and within a week, we had all the bodies. So that was a memorable case for a lot of different reasons. There have been many of them. The one that kind of stuck with me, not in a bad way, I was a young detective, probably just a few months on as a detective. So I was just 7.5 years on the department. And when you become a detective, generally speaking, the sergeant will give you a bunch of child abuse cases to start off with, because child abuse cases are a great way to hone your skills, get people to talk to you, collect evidence. They're a really good proving ground before you start taking on homicide. And I had this one child abuse case. It was a young girl who had been physically abused by her father. and the referral came from the school. And I remember the DHS caseworker telling me that the girl was not easy to talk to, probably wouldn't make a statement, and really kind of dampened my expectations. So I went to the house, and she was, it was out in the middle of nowhere, Hancock County. And she had set up a lemonade stand at the end of her driveway. And I said, that's my in right there. So I went up and I bought my first cup of lemonade, and we just talked about the weather or whatever it was. We talked about all kinds of different things. On my third or fourth glass of lemonade, I started asking her about the physical abuse, and she gave me a statement. And I walked away from that experience thinking, okay, that's what this is about. It's about making a difference. And we were able to take some steps to make sure that the mother's boyfriend was no longer in the house at the time. And I think we convicted him of physical assault. But I thought, you know, that's what this is about. It's not about anything else. It's about helping young people or victims of homicide. And that's when I really became attached to the criminal aspect of the investigation process.
So Chris, you know, I'm a dad of 2 young kids. I'd never get past day 1 in your program having to work with child abuse cases. There's no way. I think I would very much struggle with just the psychology behind having to handle that. So how do you, you know, you've mentioned several times, you know, helping people. How do you keep that at the forefront and push past all the bad stuff, knowing that at the end of the day, you're helping this little kid who sold you lemonade, even though the father figure, the mother figure is a very bad person? How do you keep that at the forefront of what you're doing?
Well, to be completely honest, that's a process. When you become a trooper or detective, you're very idealistic about what the system's going to provide and your role in that system. But towards the end of my career, what I really realized is the relationships that you build with the victims and the families of those victims are as important as to what happens within the criminal justice system. For instance, in a homicide, my role towards the end was to sit with the family during court proceedings, explain the process to them, but you really become attached to these families. And that serves a purpose. But as far as how do you separate the two, I was never really good at that. Going back to that lemonade example, when I interviewed that boyfriend, my blood was boiling because I knew what he had done to the girl. You have to keep it in check. And you have to find a way to compartmentalize what you're actually feeling and the way you're displaying that. When Christopher Grotton and I went up through, the way to deal with that was to pretty much bury the stress that we dealt with. That was pretty much the mode of operation. So when I drove into my driveway at the end of the day and I shut the door to that cruiser, that's where that life stayed. Fortunately for me, my wife and kids presented an alternate reality almost. They had very fortunate to have a family that I have. We've always been extremely close, but it's like you're stepping in from one world to another. And what we've learned, Christopher Grotton and I've learned over the years, is that's not the best way to deal with it. That you need to, as things happen, you need to address them and normalize them as they occur. So there are systems in place. When I ran the SWAT team, after every call, we would get together right there before we left and start debriefing the call, talking about the good things that happened, the bad things that happened. And by doing that, you're normalizing the experience. You're providing a context, and you're also trying to identify areas that might need to be addressed. Same thing happened on homicides. I started doing the briefings on homicides where we would gather around before anyone left and just talk about what happened. And on some of the really, really bad ones, we'd have a formalized structure. We'd have somebody come in and facilitate a debriefing. So I think it's never going to be a situation where you can jump into that field and never be impacted by what's going on. But I think the profession is getting a lot better at addressing the impacts and trying to mitigate the cost to doing that type of work.
Excellent, thank you. And as far as folks coming in to help debrief, when that was called on, you know, as we talked about, you know, different career paths, and we're looking to talk about this with students in the fall, were those also folks that were working through the Maine State Police, or were they from outside organizations that you partnered with, or a combination of the two, just out of curiosity?
A combination of the two. I think, I don't know if they're still doing it, but when the major crimes unit was under my supervision, we brought in twice a year, we brought in outside folks that were specially trained in dealing with officers or military people with that type of exposure. The state police also stood up a critical incident debriefing team, so members from within would also come out and facilitate. So it was a combination of both strategies.
Great, thank you, Chris.
So,
And Jay, well, go ahead, sorry, Chris.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, we do a couple of things, and Chris is exactly right. We have been trying to find that right balance of clinicians to allow our members to go and just purge. And it's almost like a mental health checkup every so often, probably a couple of times a year. Before I left the command staff, we're just starting a program. It's been challenging to look at not just physical but mental health of our people, and so we're trying to get something formally in place throughout somebody's career, so that the goal is that when they retire, they're retiring as whole and well as when they started. But for major incidents, major scenes, traumatic events, we do have a members assistance team. Used to be the critical incident stress debriefing team. Those are troopers that are trained and certified to come out and be that, that early intervention and either point folks to treatment if they need it, but to just talk through, this is what you can expect, and these are physical and psychological things you're going to experience after a traumatic event. So we've approached it from a couple different views. I think the biggest change I've seen is that we're now accepting that this is a problem. For a long time, we didn't. We all have examples, but for a long time, you went home and put it to rest, and sometimes not in the most healthiest of ways over the generations of law enforcement. I think we're doing a much better job of recognizing that it's a problem, but we have a long way to go.
Excellent, thank you. I mean, when we look at something like the pandemic and what that alone has done for folks' mental health, I couldn't imagine being part of a homicide investigation or something like that, where it's much more graphic than stuff that we're dealing with, and the mental health assistance that might be needed in that. So I can see where that would be coming from for sure. Jay, how about you? A memorable moment or a highlight for you?
This is going to be difficult because I've been a detective for almost 20 years. So to try to narrow down a case, I think I've been a part of virtually every homicide investigation since 2002 in the Bangor North area, but also, I didn't mention earlier, I'm on the evidence response team. So a lot of these homicide scenes, I was there with other team members processing, the grisly stuff that you see at a murder scene. There's a few that kind of do stick out. I guess a highlight for me investigatively would be the Joyce McLean case, which is probably probably the most coverage through the media. And that was a cold case from 1980. So Joyce left her house on August 8th, 1980 in East Millinocket. And she was found behind the school and died as a result of a murder. So that case kind of went stale, and we rejuvenated the efforts in investigating it back in 2008 to kind of coincide with a exhumation of her body that was funded by the Justice for Joyce Committee. They retained Dr. Bodden and Dr. Lee to do an autopsy on her to see if we could get evidence. So our department recognized that that was a great opportunity for us investigatively to reopen, or not necessarily reopen, but to rejuvenate the efforts in that case. And that culminated in an arrest and ultimately a conviction. So that one was extremely satisfying. As far as trying to narrow down cases, with the cold case unit, we have 80 unsolved cases and 20 that are missing, believed to be murdered. So that right there totals about 100 cases that I've had a part of at least reviewing and definitely investigating a large portion of those. And prior to that, my time in major crimes, probably about 150 or so homicides that I was involved in. The more memorable ones are usually the more the ones with the more gruesome details, or also the ones where, like Major Grotton was talking about earlier, about using a certain command structure, the incident command. So the larger scale investigations where it involved multi-jurisdictions or large search efforts. Nicole Cable comes to mind, where a 15-year-old girl went missing from Glenburn, met somebody on Facebook, and she died as a result of meeting with a person who solicited her to meet him out at the driveway. And there was a very large scale effort by our department just to try to find her. And I remember developing some information with another investigator as to her whereabouts. We pretty much had determined that she was not alive, and the goal at that point was just to find her. So I remember being on the phone with my sergeant at the time. We had just developed some information about where she was. He was at a scene where they were conducting a search, and he kind of paused. I could tell that his attention was distracted by someone else, and he said, "Oh, hang on a second. Yes, we just found her." And that's a moment that I'll never forget. It was relief because we had found her, although we knew that it wasn't the ending that we all wanted. But other cases that were memorable were, there was a triple homicide up in Dexter with Amy, Monica, and Cody Lake, that involved somebody basically shooting their whole family and then themselves. So what was memorable about that is just being at the scene, and there was so much death and destruction in just one room, and processing the scene, but also trying to mentally process what it was that we were observing. Early on in my major crimes unit career, I remember getting called to go up to New Sweden for an arsenic poisoning, and that ended up making national and world news because of the mechanism that was used. At least one person died, and then there were 16 that were critically ill, and we did not know if they were going to make it or not. Some died a few years later, but there was one homicide that was involved, and of course there's a few cases that involve multiple victims, and those are definitely memorable. And of course, any case that involves a child, it's memorable for so many reasons. A lot of it is just that, you know, the taking of a life that's so young, and the loss of innocence is what's kind of impacting most of us at the scene when we go to those types of cases. So I narrowed it down to a few.
Thank you. On a lighter note, is there any case that stood out to you or incident that you just laughed out loud at the ridiculousness, and nobody got hurt, and everybody was okay, but it gave you a good chuckle at the end of the day before you parked in your driveway? Or do you guys just deal with all the bad stuff?
Well, no, we don't. I can't think of a specific case, but oftentimes in the gruesome cases, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that goes on that there's a certain mental aspect of it, I guess, that you kind of have to try to find humor even in situations where there's so much gruesome things that you're looking at, just so you can mentally cope with what it is that you're seeing. So believe it or not, police officers are extremely funny people, and behind the scenes, we kind of try to lighten the mood a little bit by making each other laugh. But there are we used to have a quote board at our office. So whenever somebody, either a detective or somebody that we interviewed, said something so off the wall that was hysterical, we would always write it down. I can just give a very brief example of a detective and I were speaking with somebody at a town that I won't mention, but we were interviewing somebody, and as the detective and I were leaving, my partner hits his key fob on his car, so it unlocks the door electronically, and this guy kind of steps back, and he's like, what did you do to your car? What was that? So he had never seen anything like that before. So my partner's explaining to him when I hit the button, I can make the car unlock. And when I hit this button, I can make it lock again. So he was so perplexed by this, and he just kind of steps back and he's like, wow, I got to get one of those for my four-wheeler. And we were just like, where did that come from? Like, there's no doors on a four-wheeler. So this makes absolutely no sense. So we just kind of looked at each other and chuckled and, kind of went on our way. But there's like thousands of those little examples that I could give.
My buddy had a get together in Massachusetts. He's a police officer down there. It has been for many years. About 10 years ago, I was down there, and he had a bunch of his police officer coworkers, and we went out to the bar together and had a couple drinks. And I haven't laughed so hard in my entire life. The anecdotes just like that. I mean, I was just doubled over in stitches. All these little things that just built up, and they just strung them all together in their story time. And it was a memorable night. It was really funny.
There are thousands of them. I do have one. Can I tell one story?
Please.
When I was young, I served as a field training officer. So one of my trainees was a guy named Brian Cernak. I don't know if Jay knew him, but I knew Christopher Grotton. He went on to the New Jersey State Police, and he ended up doing very well with the New Jersey State Police. But on one of his first nights with me, we got called to a domestic situation down in south of Blue Hill towards the coast. And it was a typical domestic. Both parties were intoxicated, but he had clearly assaulted her. So we put him under arrest, and he was being secured in the cruiser, and Brian had to go in and get the statement from the female victim. And I went in to check on him because it had been a while, and he still hadn't written anything down. He had a notebook in front of him. He had a pen in his hand, but he still hadn't written a word down. So I kind of said, Brian, we got to get going. I had a deputy outside, or somebody outside, watching the prisoner, but I noticed that he was reluctant to write anything down, and he kept looking at me like, I can't. I'm like, so I finally pulled him aside. I said, what is going on? He goes, all I've got is a black pen. It has to be in blue. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they said, they told us at the academy, everything originally had to be in blue. And I'm like, I don't care if you write it in a crayon at this point, just write it down. And things like that happen all the time. And you chuckle about that for forever. Another one, I was a field training officer for my own brother who was older than I am, but he came on to the department after me. And we had gone to a sexual assault complaint. And at the time, to maximize our efficiency within the troop, they wanted us to dictate all of our reports and then take this cassette tape down to the secretary, who would then type them out. So Jerry was trying to dictate the statement of a victim of a sexual assault, and it became such a light moment because he kept trying to say these words that he never normally used, and he just couldn't get them out without laughing. And it's just a moment I'll never forget, because your career is full of those things where it's funny in the moment, and if you try to explain it to somebody, it's not so funny, but it really is fun.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. So is this other officer, did you gift him blue pens for the next 10 years of his career? He kept it going. Sounds like something that my buddies would do to me anyway. So excellent. So we're nearing the end of our time here. One of the other options for folks to learn about tonight was technology used in law enforcement. Is there anything new in the past several years that has really been a game changer for technology in law enforcement that we could touch on?
Jay, do you want to hit phenotyping, or do you want me to?
I can real quick, I guess. It's well, it especially applies to cold cases if you consider genealogy and phenotyping, where basically you're predicting traits of a person by looking at their DNA. So for example, if you have unknown DNA profile from a crime scene and you run it through phenotyping, they can tell you the nationality or the ethnicity, potential hair color, eye color, so that you can formulate potential suspects. So in their ancestral origins. Once you marry that with genealogy resources, then they can start trying to narrow down who that person is through family who have submitted their genealogical profiles in public databases. And I stress public because there are certain companies that we deal with that or work with that help us try to determine who this unknown profile might have come from. But phenotyping and I mean, when I came on, we didn't have cell phones, so we had to have a credit card and with a 16 or 18 digit number, and you would have to call the complainant from a phone booth using that calling card. And eventually I got a bag phone for my cruiser, eventually a cell phone. The radios have come a long way. I know the major has worked on several projects with our radios, so he can talk a lot more about that. But a police cruiser, when I started in 1997, looks so much different than it does now. And at the lab also, just the different types of DNA testing, that has come a long way also. Anything that's lab related, chemistry, DNA, there's been so much change and difference for the benefit to us to try to be able to identify somebody from a crime scene.
I didn't even think of cell phones. My gosh, that must have been a game changer in itself. Like,
Yeah.
Imagine having to go to a payphone with a calling card back in the day. I used to call my folks from college. I'd use the floor phone and give them a call. Man, wow.
One of the other advances is in photography. I teach a photography class and we spend a week on drone photography, but I know the state police has a drone that let's say there's an accident on the Maine Turnpike down in the Portland area. So there's traffic going through. There's a great need to get that road open, but oftentimes you need to take photographs. They can put a drone up and have the drone take a series of photographs and the computer software will take the cars out of it. So all that you see is an empty road in the accident scene, even though traffic's going by during the time the photos are being taken. It's unbelievable what they can do.
That's wild. I didn't even know that was possible. Wow, that's wild. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for sharing today. I really appreciate your time today. And before we wrap up, it's just about 5 o'clock here. Marlene or Brian, do you have any questions or anything you'd like to add to the presentation this afternoon?
Nothing for me. I enjoyed it.
It's good to see you, Brian.
Excellent. Well, thank you to our panelists, Jay and Chris, and thank you, Brian and Marlene, for joining us this afternoon. And gentlemen, like I said, we'll look at revisiting something like this for the students in the fall and keep this going. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise and for a couple of laughs. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.